Hi everyone. So in case you haven't noticed, the whole entire internet has blown up with images from MidJourney, and I've had a lot of requests from people asking how I use my portrait work with MidJourney and creating backgrounds. Now, I'm not sure if any of you want a tutorial on how to get prompts for interesting images. If so, just comment below and I'll do one of those really quick. But this is one image that I just created today. It was just a basic studio shot and I shot it on one of my regular backdrops, so it was kind of brownish, a little bit of texture to it, not too much. And I actually combined two images from MidJourney to create the backdrop. And I thought what I would do is I would just really quickly show you some of the backgrounds that I've recently made, and then I'll show you how I merge a portrait into a backdrop from MidJourney. So I'll just show you a couple examples of backdrops that I've recently made. This is one, and what I love about MidJourney is typically what you do is, you find your backplate and then you shoot your subject in studio to mimic the light in the image. But with MidJourney, you can actually just take existing studio shots and you can replicate a look with the light by using prompts in MidJourney, and then you don't even really have to do it the other way. But you can still do it that way. Let's say you made this image in MidJourney and you're like, oh my gosh, so I got to make sure I light my subject from above, because as you can see at the top here, it's definitely lit from the top. So you're going to see that up there. And here's another one. And I did a series of these. And also I was thinking of releasing an image pack of approximately 20 images, backdrops that I've made. And if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments and I will put that in my store very soon. And this one I found to be very interesting. I was playing with different new prompts that they've come up with as far as stylize and things like that. And I really thought this is cool. We could definitely use this for a composite that would turn out pretty good. Now keep in mind that I do typically go in and correct all of the strange little nuance things that happen in MidJourney, like what is this over here? And I specifically said in my prompt, no furniture. So whatever this square blob thing is, I'm not sure if it's a bed. What I would do is obviously paint that out. What else? Okay, so I'm gonna come into my base layer and just show you really quickly the image I decided to work with. Now this image started out like this, all right? And as you can see, if I remove her, this is the unretouched image, and I shot this in Virginia at my workshop. This is the lovely Veronica. But what I ended up doing was I extracted her from the background. I extended the dress because, as you can see in this image, because she's standing in really high foliage, you couldn't even see the end of the dress, and I really wanted it to be there, so that's what I did. I did my basic retouching on her, and then what I did was it was funny when I was doing this because I really loved this pose and I loved the way the light was hitting her face, and I wanted to create an image in MidJourney that would complement the color of the hair and the dress and the angle of her face. So this is what I ended up creating in MidJourney, and I just thought, oh my gosh, it's just so pretty. I had to do some corrections, so I used my clone tool to correct some of these steps and to go into liquify, and I straightened out or curved out the end of the tunnel up here. And then what I did was I added a gradient, and this is where I placed her. So you can see I added, if I click here, you can see the ground shadow beneath her, because obviously there would be shadow in front of her since the light is really coming mostly from behind and a little bit from above. So I'm just going to turn her off, and I'm going to go ahead and combine these three layers into one. And then what I typically do, and this is entirely your, style or whatever it is you want for your image, but I myself personally always like to blur out the background a little bit. I just feel like that separation between the background and the subject is necessary and much prettier. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the background layer. I'm going to go into Filter, Blur Gallery, Field Blur. So the lovely thing with Field Blur is you can bring this point down to where Veronica is standing and you can create zero blur. So that means that this whole area here will stay tack sharp regardless of where you place other pins. So you can see if I hold my cursor over here, I can put another pin and I can decide the amount of blur I want here. But keep in mind that wherever you place your blur, it's going to have a huge effect everywhere else. Now, I really don't want any blur on the sides here because this would be closer to the camera and it would be much more in focus. So let's just unblur those sides, and it's doing a good job of really reducing the blur in the areas that I want it to be reduced. I usually will come into the corners and do the same thing here because we don't want blur to be where it really shouldn't or wouldn't be occurring naturally. So same thing all the way up here, we're going to reduce because this whole area is in the same focal plane, so it would not be blurry all the way here. So this should stay relatively sharp. And you can see that this particular pin has brought back the sharpness of various parts. So you can come in, and I'm not going to really dial in more blur over here because I think that looks pretty realistic. I do want a little bit here. I'm going to move this one up here a bit, bring it over. See, that's way too much. Bring it over to about here. I'm just going to place this a little further up because it really should be pretty sharp all the way down here. So we really want to make sure that that stays. But then right here, it needs more blur, and right here it needs more blur. So, it's really important that you place your blur corrective in the correct way. And by doing this, don't forget that you can always come back and you can brush the detail back because you duplicated your layer first, right? Let's add one more here. Blur that out a bit, and I'd say that's a good starting place, so I'm just going to click OK. And so don't concern yourself too much if you got blur on areas that you really don't want blur on, because like I said, you duplicated your layer. So we can come back in here, add a mask if you want to. With a black brush you can paint back some of that sharpness, which we would definitely have here on the side. So just bringing back the sharpness in the areas that you want to maintain that focus. Pretty much all around here. And I'm looking at this little blank spot here. Now we're going to have to do something with that, and probably this too, because it really makes no sense, does it? So as perfect as MidJourney gets a lot of these images, just keep in mind that not very often can you use it straight out of the camera. You do usually need to do a little bit of tweaking. So if you look, that looks way better. I'm just going to add a blank layer to the top, grab my clone tool, sample over here, and just bring some detail back to this area. Same thing over here and right about there. You just don't want it to be, randomly blank. So I'm just going to add probably a little bit of this here too. Like that. And I think what I'm going to do is just extend this step over like that. I think that looks okay. Let's just pop Veronica back in and see what it looks like. And see, that looks pretty good. So you can really see that your light source is coming from above and to the left, and the fact that her face is pointing up in that direction is just lovely. I did darken down the bottom of her dress a bit with a clipping mask and using multiply blend mode and sampling some of the colors in the image. But I do highly recommend that you use existing colors in your image to embellish your subject so that it does look better. Now, there's a couple of other things that you could do. So I'm just going to go ahead and merge these layers and do a quick save because, you know, Photoshop, I've had lately, I don't know what it is, Photoshop just freezes and it spins, and so I'm getting a little bit anal about saving now, probably saving every single time I do something, and I just want to maintain that because I've had so many crashes lately. I honestly don't know what's happening. Okay, so, and I know I say the word so way too much, I gotta stop. All right, now what I want to do next is I really want to just make sure that, I mean, looking at this, I think the colors of her match this background darn near perfectly. And if you're wondering what prompts I used for this color scheme, I used the term muted burnt orange and gray coloring. Okay, and that gave me this, which was exactly what I wanted. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a technique. I'm sure you've seen it, but I'm going to try it and just see what happens. Go to Image, Adjustments, Match Color. If you happen to have a subject that doesn't match the color of the background very well, you can attempt this. Now, it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. So click your neutralize button here, and you can see that it really blues her out, which we don't want. But in your source, choose the actual name of the background image, which is the file name. So this one is Veronica 4.1. So that's my source. And then the layer that I want to use is the only other layer, which is layer 7. And now what you can do is bump up your color intensity, or you can pull it down. We definitely don't want to pull it down because it's desaturating it to the point of it not being very good. And she's far too blue. So if we start removing the fade or increasing the fade, it should bring more of the colors of the background into the subject. And it's going to be personal preference. It's whatever you think looks good. For this one, it's pretty high. I don't usually have to go that high, but the fact that the neutralize, if you turn neutralize off, you can see that it's way saturated. So let's not use neutralize and reduce the color intensity and see what happens. It might actually be better. You know, I actually think it is pretty good. So if you increase the color intensity, it brings back more of the cooler tones. Now luminance, I can pull up the luminance a bit, just in case you want to brighten your subject some. But I would say that looks pretty good. Let's go before. Oh look, before and after, it's almost identical. So I pretty much replicated exactly what was happening already. But play with the neutralize, because I do find that most images that I work with, I do have to use the neutralize feature. I think because this image, the subject was already color matching so well to begin with that it really wasn't very useful. So I'm just going to click OK. And now it's going to apply that to Veronica. And usually what I do when I really want to get kind of really perfect with the blending is I'll use my mixer brush and I'll come in and I'll make sure that any of the edges of the subject that were cut out and don't look very good, I'll just use Liquify to blend them together. And I think so far though it's looking pretty sweet. I think what I will do though is just bring her, I'm going to duplicate her, turn one off, because I always do that when I make changes so that in case I don't like it, there's a problem, I can undo it. I'm just going to go into liquefy really quick and fix the dress a little bit because I don't like this swoopy thing right here. I feel like this piece here should be more straight and consistent with the rest. And I also feel like even though this was a puffy dress, it's too puffy here. Now I could erase this portion, which would probably be easier than trying to use liquefy. But let's just zoom into liquefy and see what happens if I do. Because a lot of times using the right size brush, you can actually do this successfully without worrying about distorting her arm too much, as long as your cursor includes half the arm and half the area that you're affecting. But I also see that it distorted this portion a little bit, but now I can make my brush a little bit bigger and even bigger, and then we can really start to affect that area. You can see her waist here, which is good. This is the belt she had on, but I always just want to make sure that it doesn't look liquefied, right? Because if you're not using liquefy properly, it looks terribly obvious. So you can see now that we did quite successfully move that. So I just do some large adjustments here, like so, and then I'll come in with a smaller brush and just push it in so it looks a little bit better. So make sure you back up, and I think that that looks more believable, that it's actually starting at the waist and coming down and then extending out. However, now I feel like this portion is far too bulbous and this is way too straight, right? So let's make a big brush and just pull this whole piece out here. Maybe I will push this part in a little bit as well. But, I mean, I think for all intents and purposes, this is pretty good. Let's just click OK and see what we got. So there's that. And if we want to take a look at the before, I think that that's better. Now I usually make the dresses a little bit longer, and if you look at the size of her head in relation to the length of her body, I see her head looking too big. So because of that, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab my square rectangular lasso tool, and I'm going to just choose, I'm going to make sure I'm not anywhere around that little piece of embroidery. And I can see a bit of liquefy issue there, but I'm just going to go like this, but I'm going to do it so I grab the whole piece. And actually before I do this, because I don't want to make any mistakes, I'm going to duplicate that layer. And now I'm going to do it. So I'm going to grab like this and Command or Control T to transform. And now I'm going to pull this down a little bit to about here. Okay, so click Enter and then Command or Control D to deselect. And you can see that we can see the dress on the other side there. That's totally fine. And you have a couple of options, right? You can turn this back layer off, and now it's just going to remain this way. And I do feel like that is a little bit more realistic as far as in relation to the size of her body with her head. And you have to be careful of that, because that does actually matter, and it does look a little crazy if you don't have things looking, you know, proportional. And I think that's good. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these 2 back copies and quick save again. And you can see the ground shadow down here. It looks pretty realistic, which is nice. And I do like the fact that the edges of the dress are kind of raggedy. I think it looks cool. However, there are a couple pieces here. If we zoom right in, there are a couple pieces like this missing, and the mixer brush. So I'm going to hold down my brush tool, menu pops up, choose the mixer brush. My settings are up here, and I am going to make sure that sample all layers for this is turned on, and I'm just going to very carefully fill in that portion of the dress over here that is missing. You can always come back in with dodge and burn layers, and just increase the brightness if you feel like a lot of that the darkness from the background came in. And you can also see here that it looks softer now because this is much more sharp. So in order to fix that, I would also come in with a mask and just use a hard brush and get rid of that. So now this is directly straight, which isn't realistic. So I'm going to come in and just little circles, blend that in. Now we could, use the mixer brush all the way along here, but if we do that, we're going to have to come in with a mask because the edge of this dress should not be blurry. It should be pretty tack sharp, or as sharp as it is. So if I do this and correct all of this, I'm still going to have to come in and using a mask, just sharpen that back up, like even this here. And I have been really considering getting a Cintiq because the delay with the mixer brush drives me nuts, and I'm really curious to know if the Cintiq would be better. I have watched some reviews of the Cintiq, and I'm concerned because I've seen a lot of photographers say that the colors are not as good as they are on when you edit right on a Mac or a PC. So that does concern me, and that's one of the only reasons why I still have not made the jump. So if any of you have any experience photo editing on a Cintiq, I would really love to hear your opinion, because that brain eye hand coordination using a Wacom tablet is never really very perfect. I do love drawing on my iPad in Procreate, and I love the fact that it feels like I'm actually doing something, like drawing, and there's no delay like this. So I really would like to know. So I'm just trying to kind of straighten the edges out. So now that we've done that, I still am going to have to come in with a mask because some of these edges are now too blurry to be realistic. And a lot of you might go, I think it looks fine, and that's fine, but I'm super anal about it looking perfect. So now I'm just going to add a mask and go to a regular brush, and I'm going to right click and choose a hard brush. I'm not going to choose my soft brush, and the reason for that is because I want that really sharp, clean edge, and using this like this should bring back that sharpness if there's any blur. Okay. Yeah, that's better. Very good. Now, what do you do when you have just your subject cut out and you have a mask? The only thing I know how to do is to convert it to a smart object, and you can work with it as a smart object, or you can rasterize it. I usually just rasterize it and save. I'm just going to show you what it looks like overall now. And usually until I'm perfectly content with everything, then I will flatten it and I'll do more Adobe Camera Raw filter and color grading and that kind of thing. And you know, making sure that your edges are good and the light is where it should be good is hugely important. I've already done it, but I'm going to show you anyway. So a blank layer above your subject level, right click, choose create clipping mask. If you want to create rim light on your subject, you can choose a different blend mode like screen. And what I like to do is sample whatever color I'm trying to brighten, and usually use a soft brush for that. And I'll reduce my flow down to 15 or so, and then you can just very gently rim the outline of your subject. And this is just going to add a little bit more realistic light onto your subject. And you have to do this before you flatten your image, otherwise you won't be able to do this again. All right. You can add a little bit to her hair. But this is really fun, easy technique. I'm actually still not sure if I like this piece of hair that's coming around the side. I might end up taking it away because I'm just not feeling it, but I'll probably do that after. Okay, so you can add a little bit of rim light like that. You can see how that just kind of adds that additional lighting. You can reduce it or you can delete it, whatever you like. Okay. And as far as color toning her skin and all that, I wait to do that till I flatten this. A lot of times I will also apply topaz impressions to the background only. And once I merge the layers, I will apply it again and I will paint that effect onto the fabric. But for this one, I think I'm going to avoid that this time because I like it kind of just the way it is. So merge those two layers together like so. And if you wanted to, you could do a blank layer behind her and you could sample the lightest color and you could paint this onto the background a little bit more if you wanted to. Just remember that everything that you do needs to be done before you flatten if you want it to maintain, you know, some integrity. And she's really highly contrasted, which is lovely because the light is coming from above and behind her, and so we have that really deep contrast, which makes it look like it really could be there at that moment in time. And there's something else that I do. I'm just going to quickly grab some elements that I have. Okay, so these are just some elements that I have, and these are HDRI files. I get them from various photo bashing sites, and they're lovely because they come as PNG files, so I don't have to worry about doing anything myself. But I'm going to turn that yellow into the orange that we already have in the image so that it matches. So as you can see, it's super quick and easy. Just do that. You can also reduce the brightness. If we go to our master, we can reduce the lightness overall, which probably needs to be done like so. And just combine these two, merge. Actually, before I do that, I have another one here that I want. So what I'm going to do is just pull this one down, and I'm going to hold down my shift key and drag it. No, I don't want both. Click on that one, hold down your shift key and drag it onto that other one, and then it applies the exact same thing. And now you can merge these two. And we're gonna go back to the one that I just dumped and merged these two. And we are going to find the proper file, which is here, and we're going to pull this down and we're going to drag this onto our image, and we'll find our other one And we'll drag that one on as well, like so. So now we have these two. And the nice thing about working with these kinds of images is that you can start maybe applying them over the dress like this. And you can see that it's way too bright, but that's okay. We're going to duplicate that layer and we're going to put it behind her so that it can be like poking right about there. You can transform it horizontally so that it doesn't look like this same exact flower. And this one is probably a little bit better as far as color is concerned than this one. So what you can do is go back to this one here, come up to Image, Adjustments, Brightness, and just reduce that brightness down because it would be pretty dark, like so. And we're going to duplicate it again. We're just going to bring another one up here. We're going to do the same thing, flip it horizontally so it's not identical, rotate it a bit like that. And then we're going to come back up to this one. This one's huge, but I think it would be nice to have it over here as well. And we're going to duplicate that one again and pull that one behind her as well. So this one, we can make it a little bit smaller, kind of rotate it, put it behind her about there. But this one's going to need to be darkened down a bit too. However, we're going to come up to this one and we're going to do the same thing, Image, Adjustments, Brightness, and pull that all the way down because it's got to be pretty dark and subtle. That looks okay. And then we're going to come back to this one and we're going to do the same thing here. Now the only thing that I see with all of these little flower images is that there's too much blue, right? So we're going to merge all of these into a group and we're going to merge these two into a group. And now what we can do is we can do a levels adjustment and then we're going to clip it by this little box right here. We're going to clip it to that group. And we're going to come down to the blue and we're going to add in some yellow. I do like it, but I feel like the green is too green. We could darken it down a little bit. And when I pull this here, it's adding red, which isn't bad. I think that works. Like that looks pretty good. And now all I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. And you can see that that adjustment is on the entire image, but we're going to pull it down over group 2 here. And then we're just going to right click and choose create clipping mask. So now the whites in these flowers look more conducive to the rest of the image. And I think that looks pretty sweet because they're still in focus, because this is still an area of focus. And yeah, I think it looks good. And it just adds that little extra element, you know, that just brings more realistic looking items into the image. So that's what I do. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm pretty much ready to flatten this now. But I'm going to do one last quick save. And the reason that I save is for obvious reasons, because in case when I flatten it, I make some changes to the overall image that I go, oh darn it, I wish I didn't have that. Well, now I don't have to worry about it because I can always revert back to a previous version. Looks good. I'm going to go ahead and flatten this now. So flatten the image, and I mean you could be done, but I need to embellish her a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is blank layer, overlay blend mode, and I'm going to choose a dark-ish orange color. I'm going to zoom right in and I'm just going to apply that to her lips. So, I'm going to choose this color here and add just a wee bit of shadow in here. I might even add a little bit more color for her eyeshadow, like that as well. Zoom out, and I'm going to drop this down to about here and see what we have for blush. I'm going to do it on a separate layer because that's way too strong, and I want to have the ability to reduce my overall opacity. And then reduce right about there, and using my blur tool I'm just going to blur that out a little bit as well, and you can reduce it more because you don't want it too strong. Before and after, that adds just enough color. It looks good. Okay, so another little technique: duplicate your layer, screen mode, go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we're just gonna blur this out a bit to about 110 or so. Doesn't really matter. Hold down your Alt or Option key and click mask, and this essentially is going to just add a little bit of glow around her. So I'm not really painting it directly on top of her, just on the edge of her. And this kind of just adds a little bit of magic, and this is more of a magical styled image. And then you can decide to put it anywhere else you might want more of that magical glow. And it helps with the separating of her and the background. But you guys, you know, all honesty, I am so loving MidJourney and what it can do. I don't use it to create faces, so I'm not going into it looking at creating fake characters, because I'm a photographer and I shoot people. And so the appeal of creating random, you know, characters, it doesn't appeal to me, because I really want to use it for my photography. I feel like it's a game changer when it comes to really giving us more options and having more control over the environments that we can place people in. I love it. Do you love it? Let me know below in the comments. If you're having challenges or problems, what's your struggle? Do you have a struggle, or do you have tips? Do you have anything interesting that you've discovered that you'd like to share? I would love to hear it. Please comment below. So this is, you know, a really fun little technique to add glow to any image, and you can reduce it. And what I usually do is I come back in with a black brush after and just kind of brush it off the main areas of our subject, because I want it to be more of a rim light as opposed to actual light on her skin and her clothing, you know? So that's before and that's after. So I really, really like it. I think it's great. Feather that mask out. Go ahead and flatten. And now I'm going to run it through duplicate, run it through my exposure software like I always do. I'm just going to come up to my layer and reset it, because it automatically will apply the last thing that I've done, which I don't want. And I want to find a filter that maintains the color. I mean, I can tweak the color. I don't want too much contrast added, because I feel like there's already a bunch of contrast. I do like this one for color though. This is the Kodak Ektar 100. So we're going to start with this one, but we're going to tweak it like we always do. So coming up into the basic menu, so here it says basic, I'm going to just increase the blacks a little bit. I'm going to bring back some of that detail, and most of that black is being affected through curves. So if we come down to curves, we can see we've got 2 black points here, and I really don't want that because I love the contrast, but I don't want it to be clipped, right? And even as far as the highlights, I'm going to get rid of 1 point, and I'm actually, I'm reducing a little bit because I want it to be dreamy. I don't want it to be over powerful. So I pulled up the blacks here. I can pull up the shadows just a bit like that. I can pull down the highlights a little tiny bit, but not too much. Add a little bit of clarity, maybe something like 15. And as far as sharpening, this is what you can do, because I don't like how the clarity is going to really affect how your edges look. Let's just take a look. So if I go into my sharpening and I start pulling it, you can see here that this is really dark, and that's going to be from the clarity. So if we pull back on the clarity, see it disappear? So you might actually want to go negative clarity. It might actually be a better option. But as far as the sharpening is concerned, hold down your Alt or Option key and pull it in, because we don't really want to sharpen the background, just the edges of her. And so that mask shows you. But this is really part of that sharpening. So if I pull it back, see, it disappears. So you know what? No sharpening and no clarity for this one, because I don't want to mess with my edges too terribly much. But I do like everything else. And you have to be really careful of your edges when it comes to using those features and exposure, because it does affect it. And the grain. There's a significant amount of grain, so I'm going to pull that back. But I do like grain because it does tend to make it blend a bit better in your compositing. So just pull that up till I feel like it looks good. Pull these up. We just want some grain. So now we can see the grain. Get that more of that film look, and it looks more realistic. But we'll pull the roughness down because those are some big ass grains. And that looks way better. That looks great. Okay, click apply. So do you see how it changed the yellows to more of a warm orange, which really matches. And I think that we are done. So any comments, please leave them below. I hope you enjoyed this. And again, let me know if you would like me to put a bunch of backgrounds for sale in my store. Obviously not very expensive. And so hope y'all have a great day. Ciao.